to share with you a little bit from the Gospel of Thomas. I love the Gnostic writings because they're just so deep and they evoke such rich images. At least they do for myself. And in this particular verse, Christ tells us, "Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed. And cursed is the man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes man." Think about that for a moment. Just ponder that. Just close your eyes and ponder that. And tell me what you think about that. I'd like to get some impressions here before we start rewriting it.
I might. What comes to me is that the lion represents our animal nature, and consuming the lion is taking control of that, and which allows our spiritual nature to be in control, and but our animal nature can easily take over and become what we are and be out of touch with our divine nature. That's what it says to me.
Okay. Anyone else like to offer something? Well, when we look at how things were represented, see, when we read these passages, they can sound so eloquent and so mysterious, which is why it helps if we can manage to get some kind of understanding of what may have been going on when it may have been written. And the Gnostic writings were written, I don't know, during 100, maybe 200 AD, thereabouts. And the lion is a representation of the sun. The big mane there, rays, and the sun. So the lion is typically a representation of the sun. And we continue with that thought. The sun is a representation of, well, they say intelligence. But more importantly, the sun is a representation of the deity or God. So let's reread this. Yes. The sun is often referred to as the supreme deity in many of the pagan writings. So if we were to rewrite this, it might read something like, "Blessed is the deity which becomes human when consumed, and cursed is the human whom the deity consumes, and the deity becomes human." So, we've gotten rid of the lion. We put something in that we can work with. Or maybe this would be better read this way: "Blessed is God which becomes human when consumed, and cursed is the human whom God consumes, and God becomes human."
Second part I don't get. Kind of get the first.
Yeah, I didn't get the second part either.
Second part.
It took me a while. It took me a while. But what are your thoughts with that phrasing?
As above, so below, I guess.
You're on the right track.
First part. That's the first part.
Okay. Any other thoughts? So think about this. For the human, for us to consume the lion, is to actively engage in intellectual activities, to consume the deity, to consume God. Now, we're not talking about eating, but what might consummation mean?
Learning,
Pardon?
learning,
Okay.
studying,
Okay.
becoming one with,
Okay.
all of the above.
All of the above. There we go. What are your thoughts on the line to consummate the marriage? To consummate the deal, to consummate the contract.
Make a promise.
It's an act of completion. So when you consume the God, when you consume the deity, you are bringing the divine into you. Actively bringing the divine into you. That's what he's saying with this first part. Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed. So when we take God into us, God is no longer out here because God is now in us. And when we consume food, the food becomes a part of us. Therefore, when we take God in, God becomes a part of us. And because God is a part of us, we are a part of God. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts? Okay. So let's consider the second part. And the second part is when God consumes you. You become consumed with this idea. They like to write comedies and dramas about men who become consumed by the one they love. Any thoughts on that?
You mean like a radicalist or a over, somebody that, like you mentioned earlier, about the jihadist or that kind of person that becomes obsessed with an idea.
Obsessed.
Mm-hmm.
Obsession. They become the fanatic.
Mm-hmm.
That's what is being said here. When we take God into us, it comes back to what Reverend Thomas was saying a moment ago. When we take God into us, it's more inclusive. But when we become obsessed with God, it becomes exclusive. Because what does obsession breed in us?
Narrow-mindedness.
Exactly. Narrow-mindedness, rigidity. Everybody has to believe the same way I believe, or they are wrong. And that's what he is telling us. Cursed is the one who becomes obsessed with God or the deity or the divine because they have missed the most important part. Because love for them cannot be nurturing. Love for them is demanding. Devotion. What does devotion do? It demands. It makes demands on us. That's the difference. all within the same thing. But you've got two sides of the coin here. And what happens when you're looking at both sides of the coin at the same time? Well, you hold a coin up, you look at it on edge, and you see both sides at the same time. But you're really seeing just one or the other because you just see that edge.
Okay.
So we can easily see how one is the same as the other. God is God, not realizing that the Christian God and the Islamic Allah are different. Because when you read their scriptures, the personalities are different. Buddha is not the same as God, because when you read about Buddha, the personality is different. We can't say, well, they're all just another name for God, because that's not true. That's like saying Ray is just another name for Sharon.
Depends when you get married.
Oh.
Yeah. So does this make sense to everybody? What are your thoughts, Reverend Thomas? You're right in front of me.
Well, it's an interesting take on that that I hadn't considered. Um, it certainly gets us to a good place. Um, I'm not sure that that I follow the different names for God because maybe it depends on the forest and the trees. On one from one perspective, when you're very close to it, what you said is true, and from a different perspective, there is only one creative source, and the differences are the way we each experience that source, and then collectively in different belief systems, they experience that same source differently. Uh, Interestingly, the much of the scriptures of the in Islam are the Old Testament. Um, so there's from the time of Abraham on, it's pretty much the same. But anyway, that's just an aside. But anyway, interesting look and approach at that. How one can be totally consumed and get to fanaticism, uh, I think is kind of the point. And interesting way to approach it. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, each of us experiences the divine for ourselves. That's why there is only one path, and it's your path. It's not my path, but it's your path. They're right, there's only one path, and it's your path. And they don't always teach you that because they're consumed with the idea that it's only their path. Much of the mainstream teachings is all about one path, but it's not your path. It's this path. You can't be with those people because those people are not on the path. And that's what it's not about. It's about one path, but it's your path. Your path is the one path. Here's the difference, again, between the two. When you take God into you, it's your path. But when you become obsessed with God, it's one path, but everybody has to be on that path. And that's the difference that he's trying to show. This idea of fanaticism. Oh, it's yeah, you never know when you've crossed the line from becoming obsessed with it to taking it in and partaking in it. It's like there's that fine line. I myself sometimes get obsessive. Well, they don't know what they're talking about. This is it. Well, and then I got to stop and I got to say, Philip, that's what's working for them. Don't take that away from them because they need that. So I backstep and I say, if that's working for you, keep at it. Keep at it because I don't want you to change anything until you're no longer satisfied. So, Sandy, do you have any thoughts?
I don't think I've ever heard that particular passage before. And it was frankly really confusing to listen to. I had to write it down a lot and then keep looking at it and and still really not getting it. So not getting like the last part of it. So I appreciate your explanation because it definitely helped me to understand it.
Yeah, the idea is that you become God, not that God becomes you. And that's again, it's difficult to separate. I read this 2 or 3 times too. I'll pull it open, and I'll just glance through the lines. Oh, this looks good. And I'll put it down and I'll ponder it. And the first time I read this, I'm like you. What in the world is this all about? What do you mean a lion? The first thing that comes to mind is literally a lion consuming a man. And it's like, how does that happen? How can a lion consume a man and become a man? But when I looked at this again, I looked at this first time 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I read the Gospel of Thomas. I've got some notes here and there. This is one of those that's just so you're not the only one. But when I read it again recently, with what I've learned, lion is another representation of the sun, which is another representation of the supreme God. So if I take out the word lion and I put the word God in there, now I've got something I can work with because now it's in my terminology. See, that's the thing. When we read these books, they're fantastic books, but they're written in a fashion that the author understands. It's like the Keys of Enoch. Whoa! But he wrote it in a fashion that makes sense to him. And when I write these things, I write them in a fashion that makes sense to me. It's like I've got written right here, for a human to consume the lion, the human would have to actively engage in intellectual activities. And in some of the early pagan teachings, the belief was that the soul, through philosophy, is purified. See, I have to put this down so I understand it. Does that mean you understand it? Did you understand any of what I wrote? That I read?
That made a little more sense, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah? See, that's the thing. When we read these great books, we often don't take that into consideration. And I was like that. I didn't take that into consideration either. I'm reading and what in the world are they talking about? But now that I've got more experience in life, and I've delved, that's one of the things I do to occupy my time. When you put on disability, what can you do? You either become 2 couch potatoes, because you actually look like 2 of them by the time you're done if you don't do anything, or you go out and you figure out what else you can do. And this is what I can do. So I read and I read and I read. I spend 6 to 10 hours a day reading. Well, maybe not every day. But what else have I got to do? I mean, Ray's looking at retirement. After the party's over, he's going to be thinking, what in the heck am I going to do? So he'll have to develop a hobby. He may pull out some of those books that are on the bookshelf and start reading them. No, well, no, this makes more sense than it did last time I read. And if he's like me, or like I used to be, he may have post-it notes stuffed in it. Or he's got writing along the margins. And he reads his writings. Boy, did I have that wrong. And I do that. I'll read my notes. They're on OneNote now. And I'll read them and say, boy, have I got that wrong. Delete. So that's the trick with that stuff. You have to, it helps if you can place things closer to what they might have originally intended, because symbols represent a lot. And Sharon?
Oh, once, we kind of narrow this down to a language we all can understand, it did make more sense, so, yeah. But it was right over my head, all of it. The first part, like, I sort of understood, but the second part I didn't understand at all. But now I feel a little closer to what it means. It makes sense.
Well, if this is the first time you've heard it,
It is.
and you kind of understood some of it first time around, you did a lot better than I did first time around. Believe me, I have no notes about that passage.
Well, what made me laugh is the first part when you said, the lion consumes your man, and then, the first pun that, of course, came to me immediately was, you are what you eat. And so that was sort of a joke in my head, but I thought, okay, so I just kind of literally thought about it and thought, well, a lion could consume, not maybe completely consume a man, but maybe, but it nourishes him and he moves on. If you want to look at it literally, whatever he eats, if it's an antelope or a human, it's going to get him on to the next day. So literally, but
Let's go back to what you first said.
you are what you eat.
You are what you
Yeah,
eat.
that was the first thing that popped in my head. I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it because it's just a pun, but that was the first thing that
Was the first line, the lion
Blessings.
consumes the man and becomes the man? Was that the first line?
yes.
The lion which becomes man when consumed. Doesn't say. That's the first part. Blessed is the lion which becomes man when consumed.
When consumed by the man?
Exactly. See, a lot of people miss that one.
I think I missed it too.
It's only the second part. The man whom the lion consumes, and the lion becomes the man. But that cliche you threw out there was very close. You are what you eat. You are what you think. If you are obsessive in your thinking, it's the same thing. Any thoughts, Ray?
Okay.
Well, these riddles can really be eye-opening. So, does anyone have any last thoughts they would like to add? Then, many of the initiatory rituals were based on the idea of renewal through a symbolic death or a ritual of purification. Thus, in a sense, the initiate consumes what brings the deity or God into themselves. And I would like to thank all of you for allowing me to share this. And I want to thank each of you for sharing your thoughts, because that's what makes the difference.